Hello and welcome to Bud's RPG Review, where I give my thoughts on role-playing games, card games and board games. Today's retro review is 1997's The Compact Trail of Tsathogghua for Call of Cthulhu 5th edition by Chaosium. Okay, first a bit of history. At 48 pages, The Compact Trail of Tsathogghua is a reduced version of the original Trail of Tsathogghua for Call of Cthulhu 2nd edition from 1984. Whereas the original version was 64 pages long, this version is 48 due to the removal of one of the original scenarios, the Haunted House. The reasoning behind this removal is that the two scenarios contained within, the Trail of Tsathogghua and the Curse of Tsathoggua, being loosely related, and thus are presented in this edition as they are. Okay, to the cover. Here we have a classic piece by Steve Purcell, which has unfortunately been shrunk to the size of a postcard for this compact edition. Okay, to the inside. There'll be spoilers from this point on, so stop reading now if you intend to play this. We are greeted with the inscription, "This work is respectfully dedicated to Edgar Allan Poe." A nice touch. First up is an introduction which explains how the two adventures contained within are loosely based. The first takes the investigators to an icy waste, and the second takes them into the Canadian wilderness. It then goes on to give a short bibliography of the fiction that inspired the adventures. This includes the likes of Clark Ashton Smith, Lynn Carter, and of course, Lovecraft himself. We then go on to the first scenario, the Trail of Tsathogghua. The premise is based around the recent discovery on the east coast of Greenland of a huge block of dark stone protruding from the glacier by Eskimos hunting. The stone is carved with a huge relief of what looks like a god and covered in hieroglyphics of an unknown nature. Miskatonic University has been contacted as they have a research vessel ready to investigate it, headed by Professor Charles Curtis Matheson, and they've been given permission to do so by the Danish government. Unknown to the players, the stone is part of a wall that has broken away from its foundations buried deep within the ice hundreds of millennia ago. It is a remnant of an ancient culture that once ruled the land, the Hyperboreans. It's recommended that the players complete this scenario, then have one in between before tackling the second one in this book. The players, via the usual methods, end up on the research trip, and having been given a week to prepare, find themselves on a Boston wharf boarding the Darlena. It then goes on to detail the research team. First up we have Professor Matheson himself, who is an expert on archaeology and anthropology. He has a kindly manner, and people usually end up affording him a great deal of respect. Unknown to the players, Matheson has some Cthulhu mythos knowledge, and secretly suspects that the stone slab will be connected to the things mentioned in the Book of Dizan. Due to a somewhat bad layout, the flow is interrupted with a fairly comprehensive ancient history of Greenland. In elder times, the Serpent People rule the earth from timeless Volusia, and amongst many gods they worship Tsathoggua, the sleeper of the dark below. Legend says that they created the Vormis, a furry, fang-like race of people. Others say the Vormis are the progeny of Tsathoggua and a minor goddess called Shathak, although modern-day anthropologists would connect them to the Pongids, great anthropoid apes that existed around 17 million years ago. The time of the Serpent People came to an end, and the Vormis, having evolved intelligence, threw off the shackles of slavery and began to colonise ancient Greenland. They spread across the face of the land, and their worship of a god from the bowels of the earth, Tsathoggua, began. As the climate of the central plateau cooled, the Vormis turned their worship to another, a Dukwu, a monstrous horror bound to the frozen regions of the world, known in the world today as Tsathoggua. Those that turned away from Tsathoggua were forced into the wilds, fleeing to the high frozen mountains. After this period, the Vormis went into decline due to the changing climate, slowly succumbing to the glaciers. Around 1 million years ago, the first humans arrived at the shores of Greenland, the Hyperboreans. At first, the Hyperboreans lived in primitive conditions, but soon enough the Vormis made contact with them and began aiding them, first with everyday things and ultimately taking them to their cities and teaching them sorcery. As the Hyperboreans flourished, the Vormis continued the downward spiral to decay, ultimately dwindling to a myth. Eventually, the only Vormis left were those that worshipped the Dukwu, and they had grown monstrous and cruel in their harsh environment. At its height, the Hyperborean civilization was the greatest on Earth, and the greatest wizard of all time, Ibon, was one of their own. Eventually, the ice turned against the Hyperboreans, finally succumbing to the freezing ice age, with some migrating away from their doomed land. Surviving Vormis fled Greenland to the wilds of North America, and the Hyperboreans ended up living a savage existence. Currently, the last of the Hyperboreans resemble primitive Eskimos, with the last few in this adventure. After this, we have a brief modern history of Greenland. At the current time, it is under joint Danish-Norwegian control. It then continues with the crew roster with Henry Ethelrod, an expert in Indo-European languages from the British Museum who has a disdain for those less cultured and educated than themselves, and then Charles Chuck Granger, a graduate student working under Professor Matheson, a fine scientist with a slight drinking problem. After this, we have one of the key personnel in both scenarios, Terence Buell. Buell was recommended by Ethelrod due to his acclaimed work on Indians and Eskimos. Unknown to almost everyone, his body is covered in coarse reddish hair. Unknown to Buell himself, he is descended from the bloodline of the last surviving Vormis. This will become important in the second scenario. It then goes on to detail 3 French mountaineers, Philippe Louvois, Michel Penselet, and Jean-Raymond Gobineau. These 3 are generally pranksters who will target one of the investigators to be the butt of their jokes. They also drink a lot and are cheerfully noisy. Gobineau is actually an acute xenophobe who shuns anybody not like himself, including the ship's porter and any Eskimos they may meet. If a friend or companion is killed by a non-white person, he will react in an extremely violent manner. After this we have the ship's company. First up is Captain Klaus Vorheim, a German sailor who remains aloof and does not approve of the large amount of alcohol on board the ship, and under him he has Lieutenant Andrew Mott and Chief Petty Officer Gerald Maxwell and Louis the steward. Also there are basic stats for the rest of the ship's crew of 8 sailors. The voyage to Greenland should be uneventful, cramped and full of unwelcome pranks by the Frenchmen. Professor Matheson has brought a small library with him and will allow the investigators to use it. Eventually the expedition will reach Greenland, and after some navigating through the icy fjords they will come across the stone block itself. Nothing will have prepared the players for the sight they will behold. Standing at around 300 feet long and over 200 feet high, the rock has a huge carving of a figure with a curved sword crouching over a slain animal, and it is upside down. The figure wears clothes not known to any culture and has a large straight nose and elongated earlobes. As the players get closer to the wall, they'll realise that it is in fact many large individual blocks somehow fused together, and the whole thing is covered in strange hieroglyphics. Matheson and Ethelrod have a plan. They intend to have the French mountaineers climb the wall and set up a series of rope scaffolds and take handwritten copies of the writings. The investigators will be able to choose on a daily basis what they work on, the wall or the ship where they will begin translating the writings. Over the next few days, the expedition can go about their business, with a few dangerous events such as slipping into the ice, but it is on day 10 that things go awry. A huge chunk of ice falls from the top of the nearby glacier, plunging towards the workers below, which could result in death. Anyone on board the ship has a chance of witnessing this happening and may spot the culprits, a group of what look like Eskimos who push the block from above. If a method of distance viewing is used, such as binoculars, they will see that the features of the Eskimos are unlike those that are usually associated with them, and instead they have large, long noses and elongated earlobes like the figure on the wall. They will of course disappear afterwards. By day 11 the wall has started to become unsafe to work on, tilting forward, and on day 14 the block shifts one last time and slides into the icy depths. At this stage, quite a lot of translating will have been achieved, with the name of the city Comorium being mentioned, as well as Mu-Thulan. A Cthulhu mythos roll will tell the investigators that these were part of lost Hyperborea. It will also discuss prehistoric plants, the city being built on the ruins of an older civilization, and an ancient temple with a 6-legged horror living in the vicinity that has a formless guardian hiding within. The spells Contact Tsathoggua and Contact Servants of Tsathoggua are available. Tsathoggua is of course Tsathoggua. It also mentions that if one wants to visit the ancient temple to the mountain, they need to speak with the servant within. The location of this temple intrigues Matheson and Ethelrod, as they think they may have pinpointed its location based on the clues from the hieroglyphics. It should sit around 60 miles inland. The decision is made to journey to a nearby town called Godthorpe to outfit themselves. Upon arriving in Godthorpe, the players are presented with a few options with regards to how they spend their time. They can continue their research into the strange people they've encountered, and can even find information from the Lost Saga of Eric the Red, and also a journal from a Lutheran pastor, Pieter de Holst, in which it talks about him taking in a pair of Vormus orphans whose offspring ultimately ended up in North America. Also, they can explore a recently discovered Viking village site and find out some information from a runestone that was found there with regards to where the Vikings ended up. The investigators can also witness an Eskimo song duel, a method of justice used by the Eskimos to settle disputes where they insult each other. They will notice, should they attend, that one of the insults is to call someone orange hair. If they speak with the Eskimo shaman who is attending the event, and if they ply him with drink to aid his visions, he will reveal the true origin of the nature of the orange hair insult, telling them of a strange people that used to inhabit the land. The next part deals with the investigators' journey into the interior. There are various hazards along the way, but on day 27 they will reach their hardest encounter yet. While journeying they will discover some large tracks in the snow, and later in the evening they will be ambushed by a Nopket that has been summoned by the last of the Hyperboreans. The investigators can preempt this if they are especially vigilant, as they can hear them singing the spell that summons it. They could possibly even fight them if this happens. On day 28, they should reach the suspected location of the Temple of Tsathoggua. Should they venture inside, they will be immediately attacked by the formless spawn that has resided here for millennia unless they communicate with it. Should the players succeed in entering the temple however they manage to, they discover the walls covered in hieroglyphics that gives the story of the Vormus. They can also, should they manage to discover it, find the burial chamber of a Vormus priest. There's also a particularly creepy encounter with a polar bear that enters the temple, roars in supplication at the altar, and then simply leaves. The scenario should conclude with the players returning to Godthorpe and then voyaging back to Boston. This adventure plants seeds that grow to fruition in the second scenario, The Curse of Tsathoggua. The scenario shifts from the harsh wastes of Greenland to the wilds of British Columbia. It is recommended that the players do another scenario in between the two contained here. It begins with one of the investigators finding a newspaper article regarding the possibility of the discovery of a new primate, with the grizzly found by a trapper of an ape-like foot. The description is somewhat similar to the mummified remains of the priest in Greenland, which is what piques their interest. We then have the keeper's information. The foot belongs to one of the descendants of the Vormis from Greenland that migrated to North America. In the wild, their culture dwindled, as did their worship of Tsathoggua. They became known by the natives as Sasquatch and fled into the mountains as the humans sought to hunt them. Terence Buell, from the first scenario, plagued with the damning evidence mounting of his heritage, met a young girl, Donna Lester, who suffered from the same affliction, and when they discovered the story of the strange foot, they both found the need to investigate further. Stealing a Yeti scalp from the University of Toronto, they vanished. They resurfaced in Kamloops, where they assumed the identity of a young couple to keep a low profile. Unfortunately, while here, they got into an altercation which resulted in the death of a local, and they were reported to the local mounted division. The Mounties investigated, but the couple vanished while camping near the Caribou Mountains. They had travelled to a place called Dog Fork and met a local trapper, Morris Handelman, a supposed Sasquatch expert. Following his direction, they camped around 15 miles away, but were set upon by a group of local renegade Athapascan Indians, and one of their guides was killed while the other was severely wounded. Fortunately for Buell, as the renegades attacked, the group of Sasquatch fought them off and carried an unconscious Buell and Lester into the woods. Handelman wandered delirious into Dog Fork 2 days later and was hospitalised and interviewed by the Mounties. He told his story, leaving the part about the Sasquatch out, and the couple are now considered lost in the wilderness. Unknown to Buell, the Sasquatch had been watching the party since the day before and felt a kinship with Buell and Lester. They were carried back to their den to be cared for, but unfortunately, Lester died from her wounds. Buell, upon recovering, became their natural leader due to his superior knowledge and started teaching them beyond their basic existence, things such as making weapons and lighting fires. He's also developed a kind of Pidgin English to communicate with them. Buell hopes to lead what he now considers his people north, to a less densely populated area where they can exist in peace and privacy. So strong does Buell feel he will kidnap any person encountering them, forcing them to live with the Sasquatch or even kill those he sees as threatening their secrecy. The investigators may want to use their university connections to examine the alleged Sasquatch foot, which they can should they approach it in the right way. Also, while in Toronto, they can track down Buell's father, who will mention his concern with his minor skin disorder, and will also mention Donna Lester. They can also follow up Professor Petrie, of whom Buell was a young protege, and Donna Lester's boarding house. Buell's doctor can even be approached. Once the investigators reach Kamloops, there are various leads that they can chase down. First is the mounted police. They can give the investigators the name of the trapper that survived, Bill Paragent, and will also mention the incident that resulted in the death of a local trapper. They can also visit Kamloops Hospital where they can, with the right persuade and medicine rolls, view Bill Paragent's medical records. They then move on to the town of Dog Fork. Here they can visit the local trading post where they can speak to a Gilbert Croft, who can tell them about the whereabouts of Bill Paragent and also about 2 so-called Sasquatch experts that live in a log cabin at the northern tip of Myrtle Lake, Morris Handelman and Warren Cotswold. Unknown to the investigators, it was Morris Handelman who was responsible for the Sasquatch foot that began this whole affair. Should they finally manage to track down Bill, they find him having suffered some insanity due to his experiences, and he will act stupid even though he is just as alert as he always was. If questioned about the attack, he will tell them the events, minus the Sasquatch. Those with psychological training will be able to see right through his act. The night after the investigators speak to Bill, he will vanish. Large footprints can be found around his cabin. Following the footprints will lead the investigators to a large stone axe that they can determine is not of native origin. Next up, it details their trip into the wilderness. The first port of call should be Myrtle Lake. When they reach around 50 foot from the cabin, they will notice a sharp 10 to 15 degree drop in temperature. As they approach, they will see the door looking like it was blown open from the inside by an internal explosion. Furniture and other items are strewn about and covered in a thick coat of frost. They will also make the grisly discovery of one of the men, Warren Cotswold, shotgun in hand, frozen about 7 feet above the floor with a look of terror on his face. If the investigators search the cabin, they can find his handbook. What is recoverable is detailed here, and it pretty much explains everything from the Sasquatch foot right up to a band of Sasquatch led by a stranger, attacking him and ultimately digging up the body of the murdered Handelman and hanging it in the trees. A supplication to Tsathoggua, to those in the know. The cabin is surrounded by tracks, and this should be the investigators' next job, following them. As they progress through the wilderness, they will come upon corpses hanging in trees, as well as a group of Athapascan Indians, and they should eventually arrive at the Sasquatch dens. Here we have the stats for the average Sasquatch, as well as for a typical native. The dens are in a hidden valley between 2 sheltered peaks. The investigators need to decide how they're going to approach this, as the Sasquatch are very perceptive. They can watch them for a period and will notice Bill Paragent, the last vestiges of his sanity gone, doing a ridiculous chimpanzee impression, playing with the Sasquatch young, as the older females sit nearby watching, and will also notice a half-grown male missing a foot. All of this is, of course, sanity draining. If they continue to bear witness, they will eventually see Buell, barefoot and naked to the waist, acting as a leader to them. He will arrange a hunt and will vanish for around 3 hours. This should give careful and stealthy investigators a chance to explore. They can search Buell's cabin where they will find his notebook where he details everything since he arrived back from Greenland, as well as what happened to Donna, and the feelings he has towards the Sasquatch, or as he refers to them, the O-Man. Should they search further, they will find a dark cave with a small entrance where they can find the ancient body of one of the original Vormus priests in his final resting place. A pre-human priest of Tsathoggua, he details in stone tablets and writings on the wall how Tsathoggua has abandoned his people, and he will not teach the young of the tribe the ancient rituals. At some point, the Sasquatch should be alerted to the presence of the investigators, and this could lead to a pursuit all the way to Dogfork. If they are captured, Buell gives them the option: join the tribe or die. He explains that his people are not vengeful by nature and they will bear no grudge for any injury or killings the investigators may have taken part in, and will be afforded a position of respect amongst them. If the investigators continue to kill or wound the Sasquatch, Buell gets angrier and angrier and could ultimately use his Call of Cthulhu spell. Buell can actually persuade to let the investigators return to civilization if they solemnly swear that their secret is kept. The conclusion to the scenario is thus: Buell intends on leading his people north to a less inhabited area, and the investigators have a few options available. If Buell is injured or captured, the Sasquatch will return back to their secret valley. If they alert the public to the existence of the Sasquatch, they should actually lose San as they come to realise that they are ultimately responsible for their extinction. If they choose to take no action and leave them alone, they gain San. If they bring the matter to the attention of the Canadian government, they are invited to meet the Prime Minister, William Leon Mackenzie King, who will assure the investigators that steps will be taken to keep the beasts as a protected secret. This brings the investigators the largest San award that they can receive. Finally, we have stats for the Vormus and the Hyperboreans. The Compact Trail of Tsathogghua is definitely a tale of two halves. The first adventure is absolutely Call of Cthulhu by numbers in the best sense. The idea of a scientific expedition to discover remnants of a lost civilization is one that would definitely appeal to my sensibilities, and the voyage to Greenland with all the interesting characters aboard the Darlena is the kind of thing that these types of adventures are built on. The wall in the ice and the bleak nature of where it is can only add to the potential atmosphere that the scenario attempts to create, and the final trek into the wastes to find the lost temple is as dangerous as it is rewarding. The second scenario is, however, a different beast altogether. It's a rare case of the big bad of the act having really not done anything wrong. The Vormus Sasquatch just want to be left in peace, and the investigating the players need to do in order to find Buell is very reliant on social and outdoor skills, which a lot of players may not have thought about when creating their character, as, let's be fair, most of us usually create bookish types. The good thing about the Compact Trail of Tsathogghua is that it would be a really good choice of scenario to introduce new players to the game, as the method of investigation is following a fairly straight A to B to C path, and the mythos threat is limited but effective. The art from Steve Purcell and Jason Eckhart is quite nice throughout, and the use of portraits next to most of the characters throughout the scenario is something I really appreciate, as it helps to visualise them. An issue I have is that a scenario to bring the gap between the two would make things much easier for new keepers, and rarity aside, there isn't really a good reason to buy this over the original as you get an extra scenario. In conclusion, the Compact Trail of Tsathogghua is a decent set of challenges that will entertain new and experienced players alike, but honestly, the original, if you can find a copy, is better value. I give it a decent 7 out of 10. If you enjoyed this review, please make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and also check out my other reviews. Lastly, if you like what I produce here, then maybe think about supporting me on Patreon. Bud out.